Welcome to Exploring Orthodoxy, Christos Anesti. Now, it is the weekend, and I thought to share another useful reference. We've gone back into the Internet archive. So, if you're at home on the Internet and you're looking for something Christian to read, I suggest you do go to the Internet archive. You'll find that just through a Google search. You can type in, I've typed in Father Seraphim Rose. And here you'll see a variety of texts and also videos that are mentioning Father Seraphim Rose. Some of the material he has written. So, for example, this article here says, Father Seraphim Rose discusses the Jewish question protocols of the elders of Zion. So this is actually by Father Seraphim Rose. He's written that, whereas you'll find a range of other articles written by others that discuss Father Seraphim Rose. Now, as you can see, there's a whole range of, hopefully you can see this clearly on your screens. There's a whole range of material to read on Father Seraphim Rose. Let's find something that he has actually written to give you an idea of some of the reading material. I think I will pick this one here. It says, Father Seraphim Rose, The Soul After Death. It was released in 2009. And let's just click on that for now. So there's the book. When you scroll down, well, here is a blurb, just a blurb on the actual book. It could actually be the introduction offhand. And download options. So here you'll choose your preferred way to download and read. I like to go straight into the full text. I also like a PDF version. Look, I think I'll just go to the full text for now. So I'll download the book, and here it is on the screen. I wonder if I can make it bigger. Okay, maybe to there. So this is the full text of Father Seraphim Rose, The Soul After Death, printed in 2009. Says the American book that has become Russia's most popular book on the afterlife, awakening countless souls with its sobering truth. Okay, so this is printed in California. All right, here it starts. The spiritual realm after death defies observation, yet mankind persists in its desire to peer beyond this threshold, a threshold through which we all must pass. You will not die. Your body will die, but you will go over into a different world, being alive, remembering yourself and recognizing the whole world that surrounds you. This is a quote from Saint Theophan, the recluse in the 19th century. The Soul After Death is a comprehensive presentation of the 2,000-year-old experience of Orthodox Christianity regarding the existence of the other world, addressing contemporary after-death and out-of-body experiences, the teachings of traditional Oriental religions, and those of more recent occult societies. Although the mystery of what lies beyond the veil of death is not fully visible to us in this life, nonetheless, writings and teachings of ancient Christianity dating from the 1st century have proven timeless and straightforward, yielding sound insights into the spiritual world beyond death. From the firm foundation of Orthodox patristic teaching, Father Seraphim Rose offers an interpretation of the meaning of the contemporary experiences which have been publicized by doctors Kubler-Ross, Moody, Ossis, and Haraldson, and other researchers. He who has the memory of death as his constant companion painfully seeks to learn what awaits him after departure from this life. That's a quote from Saint Simeon, the new theologian of the 11th century. Principal teachings of Orthodox Christianity concerning the properties of the soul after death are presented in a clear, concise manner as taught by the church fathers and teachers of the early centuries. The soul after death offers an undiluted draft of pristine, mystical Christianity as it has existed since the time of Christ. So what we're reading is just the introduction, the soul after death. There's a preface. The aim of the present book is twofold. First, to give an explanation in the terms of the Orthodox Christian doctrine of life after death, of the present day after death experiences that have caused such interest in some religious and scientific circles. And second, to present the basic sources and texts which contain the Orthodox teaching of life after death. If the Orthodox teaching is so little understood today, it is largely because these texts have been so neglected and have become so unfashionable in our enlightened times. And our attempt has been to make these texts more understandable and accessible to present-day readers. Needless to say, they constitute a reading material infinitely more profound and more profitable than the popular after-death books of our day, which, even when they are not merely sensational, simply cannot go much below the spectacular surface of today's experiences for want of a coherent and true teaching on the whole subject of life after death. The Orthodox teaching presented in this book will doubtless be criticized by some as being too simple or even naive for a 20th century man to believe. It should therefore be emphasized that this teaching is not that of a few isolated or untypical teachers in the Orthodox Church, but is the teaching which the Orthodox Church of Christ has handed down from her very beginning, which is expressed in countless patristic writings and lives of saints and in the divine services of the Orthodox Church, and which has been taught uninterruptedly in the Church even down to our own day. The simplicity of this teaching is the simplicity of truth itself, which, whether it is expressed in this or in other teachings of the Church, comes as a refreshing fountain of clarity in the midst of the dark confusion caused in modern times by the various errors and empty speculations of recent centuries. Each chapter of this book attempts to point to the patristic and hagiographical sources which contain this teaching. The chief inspiration for the writing of this book has been a 19th century Russian Orthodox father, Bishop Ignatius Bryanchaninov, who was perhaps the first great Orthodox theologian to face squarely the very problem which has become so acute in our own days: how to preserve the authentic Christian tradition and teaching in a world that has become entirely foreign to orthodoxy and strives either to overthrow and dismiss it or else reinterpret it so that it can be made compatible with a worldly way of life and thinking. Acutely aware of the modern Catholic and other Western influences which were striving to modernize orthodoxy, even in his days, Bishop Ignatius prepared for the defense of orthodoxy, both by delving deeply into the authentic Orthodox sources, whose teaching he absorbed in some of the best Orthodox monastic centers of his time, and by familiarizing himself also with the scientific and literary culture of his century. He attended an engineering school, not a theological seminary. Armed thus with the knowledge both of Orthodox theology and of secular knowledge, he devoted his life to the defense of authentic orthodoxy and to an exposure of the modern deviation from it. It is no exaggeration to say that no other Orthodox country in the 19th century possessed such a defender of orthodoxy against the temptations and errors of modern times. His only rival, perhaps, was his fellow countryman, Bishop Theophan the Recluse, who did much the same thing on a less sophisticated level. One volume of Bishop Ignatius's collected works, volume 3, was devoted specifically to the question of the Church's teachings on life after death, which he defended against the Roman Catholic and other modern distortions of it. It is chiefly from this volume that we have borrowed our own discussion in the present book on subjects like toll houses and the apparitions of spirits, teachings which, for some reason, the modern mind finds it impossible to accept in a simple way, but insists on reinterpreting them or rejecting them altogether. Bishop Theophan also, of course, taught the same teaching, and we have also made use of his words, and in our own century, another great Russian Orthodox theologian, Archbishop John Maximovich, of blessed memory, repeated this teaching so clearly and simply that we have used his words to form most of the conclusion of the present book, that the Orthodox doctrine of life after death has been taught so explicitly and clearly by great Orthodox teachers in modern times, right down to our own day, is an immense help to us who are striving today to preserve the true orthodoxy of the past, not merely in its correctly transmitted words, but even more in the authentically orthodox interpretation of these words. In this book, in addition to the orthodox sources and interpretations mentioned above, we have made considerable use of today's non-orthodox after-death literature, as well as of some occult texts on this subject. In this, we have followed Bishop Ignatius's example in presenting a false teaching as fully and fairly as needed to expose its falsity so that Orthodox Christians will not be tempted by it. And we have also found, like him, that non-Orthodox texts, when it is a matter of actual experiences that are being described and not mere opinions and interpretations, often provide striking confirmations of Orthodox truths. Our chief aim in this book has been to present as detailed a contrast as necessary to point out the full difference that exists between the Orthodox teaching and the experience of Orthodox saints on the one hand, and the occult teaching and modern experiences on the other. If we had merely presented the Orthodox teaching without this contrast, it would have been convincing to few, save the already convinced. But now perhaps some even of those who have been involved in modern experiences will be awakened to the vast difference between their experience and genuine spiritual experience. However, the very fact that a good part of this book discusses experiences, both Christian and non-Christian, also means that not everything here is a simple presentation of the Church's teaching on life after death, but also contains the author's interpretations of these various experiences. Concerning these interpretations, of course, there is room for a legitimate difference of opinion among Orthodox Christians. We have tried as far as possible to present these interpretations in a provisional way without trying to define such matters of experience in the same way that the Church's general teaching on life after death can be defined. Specifically, regarding occult out-of-body experiences and the astral plane, we have simply presented these as they have been described by participants in them and compared them to similar manifestations in Orthodox literature, without trying to define the precise nature of such experiences, but we have accepted them as real experiences wherein actual demonic forces are contacted and not as mere hallucinations. Let the reader judge for himself how adequate this approach has been. It should be obvious that this book has by no means exhausted the Orthodox teaching on life after death. It is only an introduction to it. In reality, however, there is no complete teaching on this subject, and there are Orthodox experts on it. We who live on earth can hardly even begin to understand the reality of the spiritual world until we ourselves come to dwell in it. This is a process that begins now in this life, but ends only in eternity, when we will behold face to face what we now see only through a glass darkly. Quoted 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. But the orthodox sources to which we have pointed in this book give us a basic outline of this teaching, and this is sufficient to inspire us not to acquire a precise knowledge of something which is, after all, beyond us, but to begin to struggle to attain the heavenly kingdom, which is the goal of our Christian life, and to avoid the demonic pitfalls which are spread everywhere in the way of Christian strugglers by the enemy of our salvation. The other world is realer and closer than we usually think, and the path to it is right here in front of us, in the life of spiritual discipline and prayer, which the Church has handed down to us as the way to salvation. This book is dedicated and addressed to those who wish to lead such a life. Now we move to chapter 1. Some aspects of today's experiences. The subject of life after death quite suddenly has become one of widespread popular interest in the Western world. In particular, a number of books purporting to describe after-death experiences have been published in the past 2 years, and reputable scientists and physicians have either authored such books themselves or given them their wholehearted endorsement. One of these, the world-renowned physician and expert on problems of death and dying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, finds that these researches into after-death experiences will enlighten many and will confirm what we have been taught for 2,000 years, and there is life after death. All this, of course, is an abrupt departure from the hitherto prevailing atmosphere in medical and scientific circles, which in general have viewed death as a taboo subject and relegated any idea of after-death survival as belonging to the realm of fantasy or superstition, or at best as a matter of private belief for which there is no objective evidence. The outward cause of this sudden change of opinion is a simple one. New techniques of resuscitating the clinically dead, in particular by stimulation of the heart when it has stopped beating, have come into widespread use in recent years. Thus, people who have been technically dead without a pulse or heartbeat have been restored to life in large numbers. And many of these people, once the taboo to this subject and fear of being considered crazy had worn off, are now speaking about it openly. But it is the inward cause of this change, as well as its ideology, that are most interesting to us. Why should this phenomenon have become suddenly so immensely popular? And in terms of what religious or philosophical view is it being generally understood? It has already become one of the signs of the times, a symptom of the religious interest of our day. What then is its significance? We shall return to these questions after a closer examination of the phenomenon itself. But first, we must ask, on what basis are we to judge this phenomenon? Those who describe it themselves have no clear interpretation of it. Often they are searching for such an interpretation in occultist or spiritualistic texts. Some religious people, as well as scientists, sensing a danger to their established beliefs, simply deny the experiences as they are described, relegating them usually to the realm of hallucinations. This has been done by some Protestants who are committed to the opinion either that the soul is in a state of unconsciousness after death or that it goes immediately to be with Christ. Likewise, doctrinaire unbelievers reject the idea that the soul survives at all, no matter what evidence is presented to them. But such experiences cannot be explained merely by denying them. They must be properly understood, both in themselves and in the whole context of what we know concerning the fate of the soul after death. Unfortunately, some Orthodox Christians also, under the influence of modern materialistic ideas, as filtered through Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, have come to have rather vague and indefinite ideas of the afterlife. The author of one of the new books on after-death experiences, David R. Wheeler, Journey to the Other Side, by Ace Books, New York, 1977, made a point of asking the opinions of various sects on the state of the soul after death. Thus, he called a priest of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and was given a very general opinion of the existence of heaven and hell, but was told that Orthodoxy does not have any specific idea of what the hereafter would be like. The author could only conclude that the Greek Orthodox view of the hereafter is not clear. On the contrary, of course, Orthodox Christianity has a quite precise doctrine and view of life after death, beginning from the very moment of death itself. This doctrine is contained in the Holy Scripture, interpreted in whole context of Christian doctrine, in writings of the Holy Fathers, and especially as regards the specific experiences of the soul after death, in many lives of saints and anthologies of personal experiences of this sort. The entire fourth book of the Dialogues of St. Gregory the Great, Pope of Rome, for example, is devoted to this subject. In our own days, an anthology of these experiences, taken both from ancient lives of saints and more recent accounts, has appeared in English. In brackets, Eternal Mysteries Beyond the Grave, Jordanville, New York, 1968. And just recently, there was reprinted an English translation of a remarkable text written in the late 19th century by someone who returned to life after being dead for 36 hours. And there's a reference, unbelievable for many, but actually a true occurrence, Orthodox life, July to August 1976. The Orthodox Christian thus has a whole wealth of literature at his disposal, by means of which it is possible to understand the new after-death experiences and evaluate them in the light of the whole Christian doctrine of life after death. The book that has kindled the contemporary interest in this subject was published in November 1975 and was written by a young psychiatrist in the southern United States, Dr. Raymond A. Moody Jr., Life After Life, Mockingbird Books, Atlanta, 1975. He was not then aware of any other studies or literature on this subject, but even as the book was being printed, it became evident that there was already great interest in this subject and much had already been written about it. The overwhelming success of Dr. Moody's book, with over 2 million copies sold, brought the experiences of the dying into the light of widespread publicity, and in the 4 years since then, a number of books and articles on these experiences have appeared in print. Among the most important are the articles and the forthcoming book of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose findings duplicate those of Dr. Moody and the scientific studies of Drs. Ossis and Haraldson. Dr. Moody himself has written a sequel to his book called Reflections on Life After Life, a Banter Mockingbird book, 1977. With supplementary material and further reflections on the subject. The findings of these and other new books, all of which are in basic agreement concerning the phenomena in question, will be discussed below. As a starting point, we will examine Dr. Moody's first book, which is a fairly objective and systematic approach to the whole subject. Dr. Moody, in the past 10 years, has collected the personal testimonies of some 150 persons who have had actual death or near-death experiences, or who have related to him the experiences of others as they were dying. Out of these, he has concentrated on some 50 persons with whom he has conducted detailed interviews. He attempts to be objective in presenting this evidence, although he admits that the book naturally reflects the background, opinions, and prejudices of its author, who by religious affiliation is a Methodist of rather liberal views. And in fact, there are some drawbacks to the book as an objective study of after-death phenomenon. First, the author does not give a single entire death experience from start to finish, but gives only excerpts, usually very brief, from each of the 15 separate elements which form his model of the complete experience of death. But in actual fact, the experiences of the dying, as described in this and other recent books, are often so different in details, one from the other, that it seems to be at best premature to try to include them all in one model. Dr. Moody's model seems in places artificial and contrived, although this, of course, does not lessen the value of the actual testimonies which he gives. Second, the author has joined together two rather different experiences, actual experiences of clinical death and near-death experiences. The author admits the difference between them, but claims that they form a continuum and should be studied together. In cases where experiences which begin before death end in experiences of death itself, whether or not the person is revived, there is indeed a continuum of experience, but several of the experiences which he describes, the recalling of the events of one's life in rapid order when one is in danger of drowning, the experience of entering a tunnel when one is administered an anesthetic like ether, are fairly commonly experienced by people who have never experienced clinical death, and so they perhaps belong to the model of some more general experience and may be only incidental to the experience of dying. Some of the books now appearing are even less discriminating in their selection of experiences to record, including out-of-body experiences in general, together with the actual experiences of death and dying. Third, the very fact that the author approaches these phenomena scientifically with no clear conception in advance of what the soul actually undergoes at death lays him open to numerous confusions and misconceptions about this experience, which can never be removed by a mere collection of descriptions of it. Those who describe it themselves inevitably add their own interpretations to it. The author himself admits that it is actually impossible to study this question scientifically, and in fact, he turns for an explanation of it to parallel experiences in such occult writings as those of Swedenborg and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, noting that he intends now to look more closely at the vast literature on paranormal and occult phenomena. To increase his understanding of the events he has studied. All these factors will lead us not to expect too much from this book and other similar books. They will not give us a complete and coherent account of what happens to the soul after death. Still, there is sufficient residue of actual experiences of clinical death in this and other new books to merit one's serious attention, especially in view of the fact that some people are already interpreting these experiences in a way hostile to the traditional Christian view of the afterlife, as though they disproved the existence either of heaven or especially of hell. How then are we to understand these experiences? The 15 elements Dr. Moody describes as belonging to the complete experience of dying may be reduced for purposes of discussion to several main characteristics of the experience, which we shall here present and compare with the orthodox literature on this subject. Number 1, the out-of-body experience. The first thing that happens to a person who has died, according to these accounts, is that he leaves his body and exists entirely separate from it. Without once losing consciousness, he is often able to observe everything around him, including his own dead body and the resuscitation attempts on it. He feels himself to be in a state of painless warmth and ease, rather as if he were floating. He is totally unable to affect his environment by speech or touch, and thus often feels a great loneliness. His thought processes usually become much quicker than they had been in the body. Here are some brief excerpts from these experiences. The day was bitterly cold, yet while I was in that blackness, all I felt was warmth and the most extreme comfort I've ever experienced. I remember thinking I must be dead. That's from page 27. I began to experience the most wonderful feelings. I couldn't feel a thing in the world except peace, comfort, ease, just quietness, from page 27. I saw them resuscitating me. It was really strange. I wasn't very high. It was almost like I was on a pedestal, but not above them to any great extent, just maybe looking over them. I tried talking to them, but nobody could hear me. Nobody would listen to me, from page 37. People were walking up from all directions to get to the wreck. As they came real close, I would try to turn around to get out of their way, but they would just walk through me. Page 37. I was unable to touch anything, unable to communicate with any of the people around me. It is an awesome, lonely feeling, a feeling of complete isolation. I knew that I was completely alone by myself, from page 43. Occasionally, there is striking objective proof that a person is actually outside the body at this time, as when people are able to relate conversations or give precise details of events that occurred, even in adjoining rooms or further away while they were dead. Among other examples like this, Dr. Kubler-Ross mentions one remarkable case where a blind person saw and later described everything clearly in the room where she died, although when she came back to life, she was once again blind, a striking evidence that it is not the eye that sees, nor the brain that thinks, for the mental faculties become quicker after death, but rather the soul that performs these actions through the physical organs as long as the body is alive, but by its own power when the body is dead. Quoted from Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Death Does Not Exist. The Coevolution Quarterly, Summer, 1977, with a page reference. None of this should sound very strange to an Orthodox Christian. The experience here described is what Christians know as the separation of the soul from the body at the moment of death. It is characteristic of our times of unbelief that these people seldom use the Christian vocabulary or realize that it is their soul that has been set free from the body and now experiences everything. They are usually simply puzzled at the new state they find themselves in. The account of an after-death experience entitled Unbelievable for Many, but actually a true occurrence, was written by just such a person, a baptized Orthodox Christian who, in the spirit of the late 19th century, remained indifferent to the truths of his own faith and even disbelieved in life after death. His experience of some 80 years ago is of great value to us today and seems even providential in view of the new after-death experiences of today, because it is a single whole experience of what happens to the soul after death, going far beyond the brief and fragmentary experiences described in the new books. Made by a sensitive individual who began from the modern state of unbelief and ended by recognizing the truths of Orthodox Christianity to such an extent that he ended his days as a monk. This little book actually may serve as a test case against which to judge the new experiences. It was approved as containing nothing opposed to the Orthodox teaching on life after death by one of the leading Orthodox missionary printers at the turn of the century, which was Archbishop Nikon of Vologda. After describing the final agony of his physical death and the terrible weight pressing him down to earth, the author of this account relates that, "Suddenly, I felt a calm within myself. I opened my eyes, and everything that I saw in the course of that minute, down to the slightest details, registered in my memory with complete clarity. I saw that I was standing alone within a room. To the right of me, standing about something in a semicircle, the whole medical staff was crowded together. This group struck me with surprise. At the place where they were standing, there was a bed. What was it that drew the attention of these people? What were they looking at when I already was not there, when I was standing in the midst of the room? I moved forward and looked where they all were looking. There on the bed I was lying. I do not have any recollection of experiencing anything like fear when seeing my double. I only was perplexed. How can this be? I feel myself here, and at the same time, I'm also there. I wanted to touch myself to take the left hand by the right, My hand went right through my body as through empty space. I called the doctor, but the atmosphere in which I was found turned out to be entirely unfit for me. It did not receive and transmit the sounds of my voice, and I understood myself to be in a state of utter dissociation from all that was about me. I understood my strange state of solitude, and a feeling of panic came over me. There really was something inexpressible, horrible in this extraordinary solitude. I glanced, and here, only for the first time, the thought emerged: is it possible that that which has happened to me in our language, in the language of living people, is defined by the word death? This occurred to me because the body was lying on the bed, had all the appearance of a corpse. With our understanding of the word death, there is inextricably bound the idea of some kind of destruction, a cessation of life. How could I think that I died when I did not lose self-consciousness for a moment, when I felt myself just as alive, hearing all, seeing all, conscious of all, capable of movement, thought, and speech? The dissociation from everything around me, the split in my personality, more than anything, could have made me understand that which had taken place. If I should have believed in the existence of a soul, if I were religious, but this was not the case, and I was guided solely by that which I felt, and the cessation of life was so clear that I was only perplexed with the strange phenomenon, being completely unable to link my feelings with the traditional conception of death. That is to say, while sensing and being conscious of myself, to think that I do not exist. Afterwards, in recalling and thinking over my state of being at the time, I noticed only that my mental capacities functioned with striking energy and swiftness. The state of the soul in the first minutes after death is not described in such detail in the Christian literature of antiquity. There, the whole emphasis is always on the much more striking experiences that come later. It is probably only in modern times, when the identification of life with life in the body has become so complete and pervasive, that we should expect to see such attention paid to those first few minutes, when the expectations of most modern men are turned so thoroughly upside down with the realization death is not the end, life continues, a whole new state opens up for the soul. There is certainly nothing in this experience that contradicts the Orthodox teaching on the state of the soul immediately after death. Some, in criticizing this experience, have raised doubts that a person is actually dead if he is revived in a few minutes. But this is only a technical question, which we will comment on in due time. The fact remains that in these few minutes, sometimes in the minutes before death also, there are often experiences that cannot be explained as mere hallucination. Our task here is to discover how we are to understand these experiences. Point 2, the meeting with others. The soul remains in its initial state of solitude after death for a very short time. Dr. Moody quotes several cases of people who, even before dying, suddenly saw already dead relatives and friends. The doctor gave me up and told my relatives that I was dying. I realized that all these people were there, almost in multitudes, it seems, hovering around the ceiling of the room. They were all people I had known in my past life who had passed on before. I recognized my grandmother and a girl I had known when I was in school, and many other relatives and friends. It was a very happy occasion, and I felt that they had come to protect or to guide me. This experience of meeting deceased friends and relatives at death is by no means a new discovery, even among modern scientists. Over 50 years ago, it was made the subject of a small book by a pioneer in modern parapsychology or physical research, Sir William Barrett. After the appearance of Dr. Moody's first book, a much more detailed account of this experience, inspired by Sir William's book, was published, and it turned out that the two authors of this book had been doing systematic research on the experiences of the dying for many years. Here we should say a word about the findings of this new book. This book is the first thoroughly scientific one to appear on the experiences of the dying. It is based on the results of detailed questionnaires and interviews with a randomly selected group of doctors and nurses in the eastern United States and northern India, the latter country being chosen for maximum objectivity so as to test the differences in experience that might arise from the difference in nationality, psychology, and religion. The material thus obtained includes over 1,000 cases of apparitions and visions occurring to the dying and to a few who returned after being clinically dead. The authors find that in general, Dr. Moody's findings are in harmony with theirs. They find that the apparitions of dead relatives and friends, and in India, many apparitions of Hindu gods occur to the dying, often within an hour and usually within a day before death. In about half as many cases, there is a vision of some otherworldly, heaven-like environment, which produces the same feelings. This heaven experience will be discussed below. This study is of special value in that it carefully distinguishes ramblings, this worldly hallucinations from clearly seen otherworldly apparitions and visions, and statistically analyzes the presence of factors such as the use of hallucinogenic drugs, high temperatures, and diseases, and impairment of the brain, all of which could produce mere hallucinations rather than actual experiences of something outside the patient's own mind. Very significantly, the authors find that the most coherent and clearly otherworldly experiences occur to the patients who are the most in contact with this worldly reality and least likely to hallucinate. In particular, those who see apparitions of the dead or spiritual beings are usually in full possession of mental faculties and see these beings with full awareness of their hospital surroundings. Further, they find that those who hallucinate usually see living persons, whereas the genuine apparitions of the dying seem rather to be of dead persons. The authors, while cautious in their conclusions, find themselves inclined to acceptance of the afterlife hypothesis as the most tenable explanation of our data. This book thus complements the findings of Dr. Moody and impressively confirms the experience of meeting with the dead and with spiritual beings at the time of death. Whether these beings are actually those whom the dying take them to be is a question that will be discussed below. Anyway, we're going to skip through a bit of this text now. To give you an idea, it actually looks to be a very long book, but if you have the time, you can read through sections. I would have liked to have heard a bit more about the Orthodox perspective, but as they said in the introduction, they're going to give a full account of modern views and then explain the Orthodox view and how it is actually, a good view of what happens after death. So I can see here in chapter 2, it's going to start talking about the Orthodox doctrine of angels, which would be great to read, but let's see. That would be interesting to read. Chapter 3 is going to look at appearances of angels and demons at the hour of death. Just want to get a general idea of what this book is covering. Just go a little bit further down. Chapter 5, the aerial realm of spirits. Okay, it is actually very long. I'm not sure if you can see. There's a conclusion there. Anyway, there's definitely a lot of reading there, but it is the full text of Father Seraphim Rose, The Soul After Death. Okay.